There is a road in ancient Judah that begins in hunger. It starts in a town whose name, in Hebrew, means house of bread. And it ends there too. But what happens in between that departure and that return is one of the most quietly powerful stories the Bible contains. Not loud, not dramatic in the way we usually expect, just real, human, careful, and pointing, if you follow it far enough, towards something that reshaped the entire world. This is the story of Ruth. And before we go any further, I want to tell you something important about what we are going to do together over the next hour. We are not going to rush. We are not going to hype anything. We are not going to pretend the text says more than it says, or less than it says. We are going to walk through this story slowly, the way you would walk through a place you actually want to understand, looking at the ground, looking at the fields, looking at the faces of people who did not know they were in a story that would still be read thousands of years after they lived. If you have heard of Ruth before, you may have heard it described as a love story, a beautiful one. And in some ways, that is true. But calling Ruth only a love story is like calling a journey only a walk. It misses the famine that started it. It misses the grief that shaped it. It misses the law that made the ending possible. It misses the foreignness that makes the whole thing remarkable. And it misses the thread that runs from a barley field in Bethlehem all the way to a name in the genealogy of Jesus of Nazareth. We are going to find all of that, carefully, together. Let us begin at the beginning, where all good stories begin, with people who are desperate and a world that has stopped feeding them. Imagine Bethlehem in a season of famine. The ground is dry. The harvests have failed. The town that is supposed to mean house of bread has no bread, and in that town, there is a man named Elimelech. He has a wife. Her name is Naomi. They have 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and Elimelech looks at his family, looks at the cracked earth around him, and makes a decision. They are going to leave. This is not a small thing. In the ancient world, land was not just property. It was identity. It was inheritance. It was the place where your family had stood for generations. Leaving your land was a kind of tearing. It meant taking your family away from their roots, from their community, from the network of relationships and responsibilities that gave life its structure. Elimelech was not taking a vacation. He was leaving behind everything that anchored his family to their story. And where did they go? Moab. Now, if you know the Bible at all, you know that Moab is not exactly a neutral destination for an Israelite family. Moab sits to the east of the Dead Sea, across the Jordan, in territory that carries a complicated history in Israel's memory. The Moabites descended from Lot, Abraham's nephew, according to the text of Genesis. But the relationship between Israel and Moab had been tense for centuries. The Moabites had not welcomed Israel when they traveled through the wilderness. They had tried, at one point, to hire a prophet to curse Israel. And there were laws in Deuteronomy, the law code Moses left behind, that specifically said, a Moabite could not enter the assembly of Israel, even to the 10th generation. So Elimelech is not just moving to a foreign country in the general sense. He is taking his family to a place with a specific fraught history in Israel's story. He is crossing a line, both literally and symbolically. They settled in Moab, and for a while they stayed. Long enough for the 2 sons to grow up, long enough for them to marry. The text tells us their wives were Moabite women. One was named Orpah, the other was named Ruth. And then, in the compressed, almost brutal efficiency that the book of Ruth uses to tell its opening, Elimelech died. And then, about 10 years later, both sons died. Mahlon and Chilion, gone. Naomi is left, an Israelite woman in a foreign country, a widow, without husband, without sons, with 2 daughters-in-law who are also widows, also without children. In the ancient world, this is not just sad, this is terrifying. Women in that world depended on male family members for legal standing, for economic survival, for basic protection. Without a husband and without sons, Naomi has lost every social and economic anchor she had. The text tells us something important here. It says Naomi heard that the famine in Judah had ended. The Lord had given his people food again, and so Naomi made another decision. She was going back to Bethlehem, and this is where the road we started with comes into focus. Naomi on a road, facing west, back toward the life she left. But she is not alone. Both Orpah and Ruth begin walking with her. And then Naomi stops. She turns to them, and she says something that shows us the kind of woman she is. She tells them to go home. "Go back to your mother's houses," she says. "You have been kind to my sons and to me. May the Lord deal kindly with you. May he give you rest, each of you in the house of a new husband." And then the text says, she kissed them, and they wept. All three of them standing on that road, weeping. Orpah and Ruth both say they want to stay with her, but Naomi presses them. "There is nothing for you with me," she says. "I have no more sons for you to marry. Even if I married tonight and had sons, would you wait for them to grow up? No, go back. The hand of the Lord is against me." This line deserves a pause. Naomi is in real pain. She is not pretending otherwise. She is not performing faith she does not feel. She is a woman who has lost everything, who names her own grief honestly, and who loves her daughters-in-law enough to release them rather than cling to them for her own comfort. This is not a bitter woman, even though the text will later tell us she calls herself bitter. This is a woman being honest about what her life looks like. Orpah kissed Naomi goodbye. She turned back toward Moab. And the text does not condemn her for this. It was the reasonable thing to do, the logical thing, the thing that made survival sense. Orpah is not the villain of this story. She made the practical choice, but Ruth did not go. If this kind of careful, clear reading of Scripture is something you are looking for, something that helps the text make sense without noise or pressure, subscribe to Scripture Unfolded. We do this every week slowly and clearly for people who are genuinely curious. Now, let us stay right here on that road. Because what happens next is one of the most significant moments in this entire book. Naomi tells Ruth to go the same way she told Orpah. "Look," she says, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Go with her." And Ruth said no. But not just no. What Ruth said next is one of the most extraordinary speeches in all of biblical literature, and it is worth slowing down for. It is worth taking each line carefully and sitting with it before moving on. She said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also if anything but death parts me from you. Let us stay here." The first thing to notice is the structure of what Ruth is doing. She is not just making a promise of loyalty. She is naming everything she is giving up: home, people, land, religion, the entire world that shaped her, the gods she grew up with, the community she knew, the burial ground where her ancestors were laid down. She is saying, "I am leaving all of that behind." This is not a casual expression of friendship. In the ancient world, your people and your God were not abstract concepts. They were your entire framework for belonging. They were your legal identity, your social network, your cosmic orientation. When Ruth says, "Your people shall be my people and your God my God," she is performing something close to a conversion. She is crossing over, not just physically but existentially. Notice that Naomi has not asked for this. She has explicitly told Ruth to leave. Ruth is not being coerced into this loyalty. She is choosing it, freely, out in the open, on a road, with no audience except Naomi and the sky. And notice the final phrase, "Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." Ruth is not just committing to a season of her life. She is committing to the end of it. She is saying, "My body, when it is done, will be in this land, with these people, not back in Moab where it started." This matters because in the ancient world, burial was deeply tied to identity. Where you were buried was a statement about who you were and who you belonged to. Ruth is surrendering her claim on her own origins and transferring it permanently to Naomi's world. Why would she do this? The text does not tell us everything. It does not give us Ruth's inner monologue. It does not explain her theological reasoning. What it does is show us the words she chose and the action she took, and both of those point to something more than sentiment. They point to a woman who had, somewhere in her years alongside Mahlon and Naomi, encountered something in the God of Israel that she was not willing to walk away from, something that made the risk worth taking. Because it was a risk. Make no mistake about that. Ruth was not going to an easy life. She was going to a land that had laws restricting Moabites. She was going as a foreigner, a widow, a woman without social standing in her new community. She was going with an older, grieving woman who had nothing to offer her except the relationship itself. Ruth was walking toward uncertainty, toward the bottom of the social order, toward dependence on the goodwill of strangers, and she went anyway. When Naomi saw that Ruth had made up her mind, she stopped arguing, and the two of them walked on. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest, and the text makes a small note here that carries more weight than it might first appear. When they came into town, the whole town was stirred up because of them. The women said, "Is this Naomi?" And Naomi said, "Do not call me Naomi, which means pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord has brought me back empty." There is so much honesty in that moment. Naomi is not pretending. She is not performing gratitude she does not feel. She names her pain with its full weight, and the community receives her. They do not tell her to cheer up. They do not correct her theology. They are simply present. But notice the timing again. They arrived at the beginning of the barley harvest. The famine is over. The fields are full. And Naomi, who calls herself empty, has arrived precisely when the land is producing again. The text is already beginning to set up something. Now we move into Act 2 of this story, and this is where we need to talk about gleaning. Gleaning is one of those practices that modern readers can easily skip past because we do not live in an agricultural economy, and the word itself sounds archaic. But if you skip past it, you miss one of the most important things the book of Ruth is doing. Because gleaning is not just a custom. It is a law. It is mercy embedded in legal code, and it is the mechanism that makes Ruth's survival and eventually her redemption possible. Here is what gleaning was. In ancient Israel, when farmers harvested their fields, they were legally prohibited from going back over the field a second time to collect everything they had missed. Any grain that fell during the harvest, any stalks at the edges of the field, anything left behind, that belonged to the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner. Not as charity, not as something that could be withheld if the farmer felt ungenerous. As law. Deuteronomy 24 makes this explicit. When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over them again. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not strip it afterward. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. 3 times in that passage, the law repeats the same list: sojourner, fatherless, widow. The people who have fallen through the social floor. The people with no one to provide for them. The law builds provision for these people directly into the harvest process. The poor are not supposed to wait for the generosity of the wealthy to trickle down to them in good years. They are supposed to have access. It is woven into the structure of how agriculture is supposed to work. Now look at Ruth. She's a sojourner. She's a widow. She is a foreigner. She fits every category in that law, and she knows it. Or perhaps Naomi tells her, because in the opening verses of chapter 2, Ruth comes to Naomi and says, Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. She knows this is available to her. She just needs someone who will let her do it. This is not a small act of courage. Think about what the field looks like. It is full of workers who belong there. People with jobs, people who know the farmer, people who have established roles. Ruth is an outsider, a Moabite, a widow who arrived in town recently with an old woman who had nothing. Walking into a field to collect the leftovers of the harvest was socially exposed work. It meant being seen. It meant approaching strangers. It meant working all day in the sun for what the workers did not bother to pick up. It was survival work. It was work that required putting your dignity at the mercy of others. And she did it. She went and gleaned after the reapers. And the text says, she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. That phrase, she happened to. In Hebrew storytelling, that kind of phrasing often carries a gentle irony. The author knows, and wants you to know, that things do not always just happen. But the story does not overstate it. It just sets it down, quietly. She happened to be in his field. Now, who is Boaz? The text introduces him carefully. He is a worthy man, a man of standing. And he is from the clan of Elimelech. That last detail is the one that matters most. Boaz is family. He is connected, by blood, to the dead husband of Naomi. That connection is going to become the hinge on which the entire second half of this story turns. But for now, Boaz simply walks into his field, greets his workers in the name of the Lord, and then sees Ruth. He asks his foreman, "Who is this young woman?" The foreman explains, "She is the Moabite who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She asked permission to glean. She has been at it since early morning. She has barely rested." Boaz goes to Ruth, and what he does next is worth looking at closely. He does not just tolerate her presence. He does not grant her the minimum the law requires. He goes beyond it in several directions at once. He tells her not to glean anywhere else. "Stay in my field. Stay close to my young women. I have told the young men not to touch you. When you are thirsty, drink from the water that my workers have drawn." Each of those instructions carries weight. Do not go anywhere else is protection. Unfamiliar fields, unfamiliar workers, a foreign woman alone, that was risky. By telling her to stay in his field, Boaz is placing her under his protection. Stay close to my young women means she has company, a social group to work alongside rather than working alone in exposed isolation. I have told the young men not to touch you is explicit. It names the danger directly and says it has been addressed. When you are thirsty, drink from the water. My workers have drawn means she does not have to go looking for water herself. She does not have to ask. It is simply available to her. Boaz is not performing generosity. He is creating conditions of dignity. He is making the field safe and human for someone who had every reason to expect neither. Ruth falls on her face. She says, "Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me since I am a foreigner?" And Boaz tells her, he knows about her. He knows what she did for Naomi. He knows she left her father, her mother, her homeland, and the people she had always known. He says, "The Lord repay you for what you have done. A full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Under whose wings you have come to take refuge. That is a beautiful image. And it is also a legal and covenantal image in Hebrew. The wings represent shelter, covering, belonging. Boaz is saying that Ruth has placed herself within the protection of the God of Israel, and that this is a known and honored thing. At mealtime, Boaz invited her to eat with his workers. Bread, wine vinegar, roasted grain. She ate. She was satisfied. She even had some left over. And then she went back to work, and Boaz had already told his workers to leave some extra stalks behind on purpose, to pull them out of the bundles and leave them for her, to not rebuke her or make her feel small. She gleaned in the field until evening, and when she beat out what she had gathered, she had about an ephah of barley. This is a significant amount, roughly 29 pounds by most estimates, enough to last a family well beyond a single day. She brought it to Naomi, and Naomi looked at the pile of grain and asked, "Where did you glean today? Where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Ruth told her the man's name, Boaz, and Naomi straightened up. She said, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. The man is a close relative of ours. He is one of our redeemers." That word, redeemer. There it is. And now we need to spend some time with it, because it is the key to everything that follows. The Hebrew word is goel. It is usually translated as redeemer or kinsman redeemer, and it refers to a specific legal role in ancient Israelite society. The goel was a close male relative who had certain responsibilities to protect and restore members of his family who had fallen into hardship. These responsibilities could include several things. If a family member had sold their land because of poverty, the goel had the right and the responsibility to buy it back and keep it in the family. If a family member had died leaving a widow without children, the goel could marry the widow and have children in the dead man's name, preserving the family line and the widow's future. If a family member had been sold into slavery, the goel could pay to set them free. The goel was, in essence, the family's built-in safety net. The person whose role in the structure of Israelite society was to make sure that family members did not simply fall into oblivion when things went wrong. Naomi knows this, and now, standing with an ephah of barley in the house she has come back to with nothing, she sees the shape of something. Boaz is family. Boaz is a redeemer. Boaz has already noticed Ruth. Ruth continues gleaning in Boaz's field through the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, staying close to his women workers, staying in his field, not going elsewhere, and Naomi is watching all of this. When the harvest season is ending, Naomi makes a move. She tells Ruth that she wants to seek rest for her, a home where things will be well, and she gives Ruth careful instructions. Wash and anoint yourself. Put on your cloak. Go down to the threshing floor. Do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Then notice where he lies down. Go and uncover his feet and lie down there. He will tell you what to do. Now, this scene at the threshing floor has generated a lot of commentary over the centuries, and I want to be careful here. There are symbolic and cultural layers in this moment that scholars have discussed at length. The word feet in Hebrew can sometimes carry broader meaning, though the text is genuinely ambiguous. What is clear from the narrative itself is that Ruth goes, that Boaz wakes in the night to find her there, and that what follows is not a violation. It is a legal appeal. Boaz wakes and finds someone at his feet in the darkness and asks, "Who are you?" And Ruth says, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." That phrase again. Wings, shelter, covering. The same image Boaz had used to describe her refuge under the wings of God. Now she is asking him to become, in physical and legal reality, what she had acknowledged God to be in spirit. She is asking Boaz to step into the role of goel for her and for Naomi. And Boaz responds with what the text shows as genuine honor. He says, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first. You have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich, and now, do not fear, I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman." He calls her worthy, the same word used to describe him at the beginning of chapter 2. He sees her clearly. He honors her request. He does not exploit the vulnerability of the moment. But there is a complication. There is another redeemer, closer in relation to Elimelech than Boaz is. According to the law and the customs of the time, this closer relative would have the first claim on the roll. Boaz tells Ruth to stay the night and go home before light so she is not seen, and he will address the matter in the morning. He fills her cloak with 6 measures of barley before she leaves. She goes back to Naomi, and Naomi says, "Sit still, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." Chapter 4 opens at the town gate. This is where business was conducted, where elders gathered, where legal matters were settled in the public view of the community. Boaz goes there and waits. And the other redeemer, the closer one, happens to pass by. Boaz calls him over and gathers 10 elders of the city as witnesses. He explains the situation to the closer relative. Naomi has returned. She is selling the parcel of land that belonged to Elimelech. As the nearest redeemer, the closer relative has the right to buy it. Would he like to redeem it? The man says yes. He will redeem it. Then Boaz says, "On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." And the closer relative changed his answer. He said he could not redeem it. It would damage his own inheritance. "You take my right of redemption," he told Boaz. "I cannot do it." Why did he change his mind when Ruth was added to the picture? The text does not spell it out, but the logic is visible. If he bought the land and married Ruth, any son Ruth had would be considered the son of Mahlon, Ruth's dead husband, not his own. The property would eventually pass to that son, in the name of Elimelech and Mahlon, not in his own family's name. It could dilute his estate. It was not a straightforwardly advantageous arrangement. And so he stepped back. Boaz did not step back. In front of the elders, before the town gate, Boaz formally declared that he was acquiring everything that had belonged to Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion, and he was acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, to be his wife, to perpetuate the dead man's name in his inheritance, so that the name would not be cut off from his brothers or from the gate of his native place. And all the people and the elders who were there said, "We are witnesses." And then they blessed Boaz. "May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman." That blessing is layered with meaning. Rachel and Leah, the mothers of the 12 tribes, the house of Israel. Perez, the son of Tamar and Judah, another complicated story of a woman outside the expected lines of promise who carried something forward. The community is saying, in their blessing, that they see this moment as something historic. They are connecting Ruth and Boaz to the deepest root structures of Israel's story. Boaz and Ruth were married, and the Lord gave Ruth conception, and she bore a son. The women of the neighborhood celebrated with Naomi. They said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. More to you than 7 sons." In a world where sons were the primary social and economic currency for a woman's survival, this is extraordinary praise. The community is naming what Naomi herself could now see clearly. Ruth, the Moabite, the outsider, the one who had no reason to stay and every reason to leave, was worth more than the ideal family structure the ancient world could have imagined for her. Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse, and the women gave him his name. They called him Obed, which means one who serves or one who worships. Now we need to follow that name one step further, because this is where the book of Ruth opens into something much larger. Obed became the father of Jesse. Jesse became the father of David, the king of Israel, the poet of the Psalms, the shepherd boy who became the most celebrated ruler in Israel's memory, the man from whose line, according to the prophets, the ultimate deliverer would come, that David. And then, In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 1, verse 5, in the genealogy of Jesus of Nazareth, the text says clearly, Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of David the king, Ruth the Moabite. In the family line of Jesus, listed by name in a genealogy where only a handful of women appear, not hidden, not minimized, named. Think about what the book of Ruth has shown us from beginning to end. A famine drives a family out of the land. The men die. An Israelite woman is left with nothing. A Moabite woman from a people with a complicated and often hostile history with Israel chooses freely to cross every boundary she knows and follow that Israelite woman home. She does so with words that name her total commitment to a new people and a new God. She walks into a strange land at the bottom of its social order. She works in the fields under a law that protects people exactly like her. A man notices her, not to exploit her, but to honor her dignity and her loyalty. Through legal structures that were built to protect the vulnerable, she is restored. She has a son. That son has a son. That son has a son. And the line leads to David, and the line from David leads, in Matthew's telling, to Jesus. A Moabite widow, an outsider, a woman with no claim on anything except the loyalty she freely gave and the law that made space for people with nowhere else to go. She is in the line, not despite her story. Because of it, that is what the text shows. Not a happy accident. A pattern. A pattern of the outside being folded in, the forgotten being remembered. The one who had no place finding that there was, all along, a place made for exactly her. Now, here is the thing I want to say directly to you. If you have ever felt like you were on the outside of something that mattered, if you have ever felt like the people inside a story did not look like you, did not come from where you came from, did not have the same history you carry, if you have ever wondered whether there was a place for you in something larger than your own small circumstances, the book of Ruth is not a comfort that dismisses those feelings. It is a text that takes them seriously enough to answer them through story. Ruth did not belong, by any standard measure that her world would have recognized. She was Moabite, not Israelite. She was a widow, not a wife. She was a gleaner, not a landowner. She was a foreigner in a town that had known its own grief and had little reason to extend itself toward hers. And yet the law made room for her. A man of integrity noticed her. A community of witnesses welcomed her. And the child she bore became part of the most significant chain of ancestry in the entire biblical story. You do not have to be from the inside to be part of the story. The book of Ruth makes that clear. Ruth was from the furthest outside the text could have imagined, and she is in the line. That is not sentiment. That is the structure of what Matthew chapter 1 shows when it names her, Boaz, the father of Obed, by Ruth. By Ruth. She is in the genealogy by name. She is not erased. She is not a footnote. She is part of the foundation. And one more thing worth sitting with. Ruth's loyalty to Naomi was not transactional. She did not follow Naomi because she saw a clear path to a better life. She followed her into poverty, into foreignness, into the bottom of a social order she did not even know yet. The loyalty came first. The restoration came later. And the restoration was not a reward in any simple sense. It was the structure of a world that had built provision into its own laws, where a man of integrity was willing to do what the law allowed and dignity demanded, and where a community gathered at a gate to witness it. The book of Ruth is not a fairy tale. It is a careful, grounded account of how famine, grief, loyalty, law, and human goodness can work together to carry something forward that none of the individuals involved could fully see. Naomi could not see it. Ruth could not see it. Boaz could not see it. But the text can. And now, having walked through it together, perhaps we can see it a little more clearly too. The road that started in hunger ended in harvest. The woman who called herself empty became the grandmother of a king. The foreigner who said, "Where you go, I will go," became a name in the family tree of the one that Matthew would call the son of David. That is the story of Ruth, famine and return, loyalty and law, gleaning and redemption, harvest and genealogy. An outsider carried all the way in. And here, at the end, I want to leave you with something to carry away from this hour together. Something simple. If you feel overlooked, if you feel like you are standing at the edge of something that does not fully include you, the book of Ruth does not tell you that your feeling is wrong. It takes it seriously enough to show you a woman who felt that exposed, that uncertain, that outside, and who found that the world she walked into had a law in it that said, "The gleaner gets a portion. The widow has a place. The foreigner is not invisible. You do not have to perform belonging to belong. You have to show up. And the world, when it is working the way the law of Ruth envisions it, will make room." And as we close this hour, I want to invite you to sit with one question, not to debate it, not to have a quick answer, just to carry it with you. Is there someone in your life right now who is gleaning at the edges, someone on the outside of something that should have room for them? And what would it mean, practically, in your own small corner of the world, to be a little more like Boaz?